trust that you're all well. We'd like to welcome you to the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg's Publishing Your Research series of workshops, with this workshop focused on predatory and non-standard behavior journals, avoiding the predatory trap, and selecting a journal workshop. My name is Dr. Lorenzo David, and I'm delighted to be your moderators for today's workshop. I would like to start off by thanking our attendees for taking the time to join us. Most importantly, we would like to thank our presenter, Professor Rudy de Lange, for his effort with preparing and giving this presentation. Before introducing Professor Rudy de Lange to you, I'd like to go over some housekeeping rules and some important information. For the housekeeping rules, if you do have questions during the presentation, please may you raise your hand if you'd like to speak, or alternatively, you could type your question into the chat box. I will then indicate to the presenter to address the question. Just for our information, the session is being recorded and the presentation slides will be requested from the presenter. Both of these will be uploaded to the Moodle communities by the end of the week. A feedback survey will be sent out during the session on the chat section. We would like to please request for you to fill this out for us to gain further insight on whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve in the future, as well as to provide kind words to the facilitator for all of their hard work. This will also be used for the facilitators as well as RCD's reporting. By filling out the survey, this also ensures that you receive a certificate of attendance via our RCD management system, which is currently being integrated into ULink. So to quickly introduce Prof. Rudy de Lange. So Prof. Rudy de Lange is an emeritus professor at the Tshwane University of Technology. He holds a PhD in didactics from the University of Stellenbosch, South Africa, has taught design and photography, and served as a faculty research ethics chair and the university's research ethics deputy chair. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Professor de Lange. Prof, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to an interesting presentation.
Dr. Lorenzo, thank you so much for your introduction. And just a word of appreciation to Mr. Ntuli for assisting to get this presentation going. And my apologies for the failure at the last time. I think the problem was on my side, and we weren't able to do the presentation. Just want to Okay, as a start, just before I start with my main presentation, during my preparation yesterday, last night when I went through the presentation, I came across a cloned journal, which has got implications for UJ, and I thought, let me just quickly share 3 slides and just inform you about this. It's a journal that was cloned. This particular journal, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, is in Spanish and in English, mostly Spanish. It's from a university in Chile. It looks like a Roman Catholic university in Chile. That website is no longer available from the clone, but you can get snapshots of what the journal looks like, the clone looks like via the Wayback Machine. And when I scanned through it, I noticed at least 6 papers by authors from the UJ, or at least authors that indicate that they are associated with the UJ, the University of Johannesburg. Now, the legitimate journal, they publish in Spanish and English, and they don't ask any article processing charges. So it is an open access journal published by a university, but no fees for it. It's both indexed by the Web of Science and Scopus. And the legitimate journal even has got a warning on its website about the clone. So it's available there. And this is what the clone looks like. The cloned website is on the left-hand side, and the legitimate journal is on the right-hand side. And I've given the URLs there, and you can get that particular image of the clone on the Wayback Machine. And then this is what the warning on the genuine journal is about the clone, and you can also toggle between Spanish and English for the legitimate journal. The clone was only in English, and I think the last time it was available for the Wayback Machine was the 28th of September, so that was just a few days ago. But when I checked yesterday, the website is no longer available. And this is an example of what the first page of a paper would look like. The clone is on the left-hand side. That's what the paper looks like. And the genuine or the legitimate paper from the legitimate journal is on the right-hand side. And those issues that I've highlighted there is, you can see the difference between the legitimate paper and the illegitimate paper in the clone. So because it was a clone, I suspect that they would have charged article processing charges. And if UJ did pay this, maybe it's something they could look into it and maybe attend the authors that they published in a clone journal. I'm going to stop sharing this particular one and then I'll go to my main presentation. Colleagues, as I proceed, and I would love this to be interactive presentation. It's a pity I can't be there. I'm in East London at the moment. But if there are any questions as I proceed, just indicate your hand and Dr. Lorenzo will interrupt me and ask me to look at the chat box, or let me just open the chat box a little bit on my side and I can split it on my screen. There we are. Part of my presentation, I previously presented at a couple of universities, including the UJ, I think earlier on the year or last year. However, there are significant updates and additions and changes to it, in particular issues about clones and examples that I've included. I've also updated a text document, and this particular text document provides links and additional information about issues that I addressed during the presentation, with some useful URLs right at the end of the document. My presentation has got two aims: just to create an awareness, to increase the temperature about predatory non-standard behavior journals, that we become aware of this danger, and then to guide staff and postgrad students away from predatory publishers to avoid falling in that particular trap. Now, predatory journals and predatory publishers would include clones and hijacked journals. Clones is journals that mimic existing journals, and hijacked journals are the legitimate journals that were hijacked, like a car hijacking or a house invasion, house hijacking, by role players, and the editors and editorial staff are removed and they don't have any longer control over it. And those are really, from my perspective, criminal activities. Now, we'll cover the following: just the orientation and the national and international positions on predatory publishing that we've got to take, and how we can identify these predatory and non-standard behavior journals. And of course, the opposite of that, how to identify reputable journals and how we can select a journal. Now, the term non-standard behavior journals, I quite like that term. It's Cinta Galen-Torres in a paper. She uses this term. And I'll tell you now later why this particular term I think is so appropriate. And then I want to make closing in two very brief comments. Predatory publishing. Some authors see this as academic misconduct. It's just not a mistake, it's a misconduct. And then make a reflection and some questions on the consequences when we publish in predatory journals. Now, by way of introduction, I just want to show a few slides of clones. Now, these are journals that mimic existing journals or journals that cease publishing. And in a couple of years ago, these were journals that only appeared in print. So enterprises would duplicate these journals electronically and pretend to be the genuine journal. They would take an open access route, accept most papers, many as possible, and then universities have to pay the article processing charges. Many clone journals exist for a short while, they then close and the websites are no longer available. That is when the heat becomes a bit too much. Let me show you some. Now, clones have the same ISSN number and ISBN numbers, and they pretend to have the same editor and editorial board. So key is always to look at the email addresses that they would replace. Many of them are Gmail or Yahoo email addresses. Now, a telltale sign is fast or fake peer review, fast publication, and they would publish papers outside the journal scope. And the journals are on the left-hand side of the slides that are to come. This is the first one. It's a journal not published in English, the genuine journal. It's on the right-hand side, and the clone, by yesterday, it was still active. And I think what makes the clone so deceptive is that workflow platform is used by many legitimate journals. So by viewing this, a person would think this is the genuine journal, and the clone does not have all the modifying and flattering words and graphics on that would give an indication that it could be a predatory journal. Another journal is the Journal of Research Administration, the genuine one on the right-hand side, and I was able to find a copy of the clone by the Wayback Machine. And that is what the clone looks like on the left-hand side. They both use the ISBN number, the same one. On the left-hand side is what a paper looks like in the clone. On the right-hand side is what the genuine article in the legitimate journal looks like. Now, the danger with this is that a scholar can either by mistake, and I believe many of them do that deliberately, publish papers in clones because it's a quick publication route. There's no vetting of the work, there's no peer review, they don't have to spend time on that. And then the universities can actually upload this to the Clarivate system and claim subsidy for us. Now, the DHET is most likely to pay subsidies for papers published in clones because they do not have a specialist panel that could investigate journals and look at papers. And the only way that someone would know that the paper was published in a clone journal is compare the actual look and feel of the paper in the clone with the look and feel of a paper in the legitimate journal, like you see there. Now, it's highly unlikely that universities would have the time and effort to do this with all the articles that are uploaded, and the DHET does not do this. They do not have the manpower to do this. So it's my estimation that millions are involved that are paid out to universities in subsidy, which should not have been paid. Here is another clone on the right-hand side. It's a clone it's a journal in Costa Rica. I think they publish in Spanish. And the clone is on the left-hand side, and the clone actually looks pretty legitimate when we have a look at that. This is the front page of the Costa Rican journal, what it looks like. And on the left-hand side is what a paper in the clone looks like, and on the right-hand side is what a genuine paper in a legitimate journal looks like. Another journal that South Africans love is the Journal of Propulsion Technology. The journal on the right-hand side is the genuine one. It's published in Mandarin, I think, in a Chinese script. And the clone is on the left-hand side. It published works in English. But of course, it pretends to be the real one. This is what the genuine journal looks like, the front page. On the left-hand side is I've swapped this now around by accident, but on the left-hand side is what a paper looks like in the genuine journal, and on the right-hand side is what a paper looks like in the clone. Now, this is a journal about propulsion technology, and there's an example of a business article in a rocket science journal. So I always ask myself, the submission author, surely they should know that submitting a business paper to a rocket propulsion, a rocket science journal is questionable. However, let me proceed. Okay, defining predatory journals. A consensus definition. This is the best consensus definition I've come across, published in 2019, whole range of authors, and I believe that Johan Mouton, I'm under correction, was also one of the co-authors in this particular one. And I want to highlight two items that stand out to me. Predatory journals have self-interest at the expense of scholarship. They deviate from the best editorial and publication practices. So it's all about making money, and they forego what need to be done to produce a good journal. Self-interest is financially, but I must also remark that some large scholarly publishers like Elsevier are also accused of financial self-interest. I know there are some reputable journals where the page fees are over 100,000 Rand. And even up to 200,000 Rand. So that is quite excessive. Now, predatory publishers, and here I include the term non-standard behavior journals, do not adhere to the Committee of Publication Ethics, COPE's best publication guidelines. And I've included the guidelines there, publicationethics.org, and you can have a look at those. And just scanning through that will give you an idea what a journal should comply with. And that will give you an idea if you're going to submit a paper to journal and it's missing some of those requirements. It could be a non-standard behavior journal, and it could move over to predatory behavior, where it would place its own financial interest above the quality it's supposed to deliver. And to my mind, the best, most comprehensive publication is this particular one by the Inter-Academy Partnership. A summarized version is available in multiple languages. The full version of the work is available in English. The link is down there at the bottom. You can download it, and they explore predatory practices, and they give all the criteria and characteristics of predatory journals and predatory conferences. Going through this, I found extremely enlightening. So when I look at the journal and I look what I see on their website and how they manage the articles, it gives us a good idea how one can measure a journal. Now, what I like about this particular publication, they define journals on a continuum. It's not a binary process, from obvious fraudulent journals like journals which mimics the genuine ones, to low quality journals or low risk, which could be legitimate journals that engage in risky behavior where the quality of the peer review is questionable. However, if you would press them on, they would do a correction. So even a low quality journal or questionable quality journal, I think a person should be careful, because they may move over to unacceptable low quality and then actually would fall into the trap of becoming a predatory journal. It's a continuum from fraudulent actually to reputable journal with questionable characteristics. And my mind is the danger that we have is that we miss predatory characteristics of accredited journals and conferences. And there are journals on the approved list of the DHEAD and even the well-known indices that could operate as predatory journals. And I show a little bit later on, some of them do operate as predatory journals. Now, those of us that receive these things by emails, it's easy to ignore these. These are the outright fraudulent items, and these are the easy ones to spot and to ignore. Right, just a comment on national and international positions. Now, the DHEAD Research Output Policy is a legal notice. It was published in the Government Gazette. So it is not an issue that we as scholars or universities can decide or reinterpret this or take it from a different angle. And if you go through that policy, it makes it very clear that universities are not to provide financial incentives to scholars that publish, and our focus should be on quality, not on quantity, and we should avoid predatory journals. 5.3, we should safeguard ourselves. So I hope that this particular presentation will help to safeguard ourselves. The NRF also made a statement and they include the term deceptive publishers. Now, if the DHET supplied list, if those publishers and journals were not deceptive and if they were fine, they could have said stick to the list. But it's within those lists that we want to find predatory journals and deceptive publishers. And have a look, they talk about journals that do not have a rigorous peer review or scholarly publishing practices. Rigorous peer review is part of the scientific process. And if we willfully and deliberately try to avoid the scientific practice, that is seen as a form of misconduct. Right, the ministerial statement, and this universities get this every year, and this was just some of the last years. If you go through the statement, they make it very clear that the DHET is considering penalizing students by docking units for journals or research output submitted which they were not supposed to submit, and they have the reserve the right to recover the funds for a period of 3 historical years. All the major educational institutions of South Africa made a statement on ethical research and published this in the South African Journal of Science in 2019. And I just want to highlight 11. 11 and 12 has got to do with unethical practices and predatory journals. Item 11 states, it's our responsibility to avoid falling victim to predatory publishing or unethical editorial practices. Meaning if we send a paper to a questionable journal and they would accept and publish this without peer review, that would be regarded as unethical editorial practices. That's when we would say we withdraw our paper, we don't want to publish in this particular journal. So the responsibility is with us and our institutions to make sure that we select avenues that are authentic and credible. So that is a requirement which all the major and reputable academic institutions in South Africa have in the particular statement. Now, on the research output policy, page 10, the DHET also makes it clear that we should safeguard against predatory journals. And I highlight again, the main purpose is financial gain rather than the quality of research. So it's always the interplay between money making by the scamsters and they're dropping the quality in their attempt to gain financially. The Committee on Publication Ethics, they have got extensive guidelines about research conduct, publication, scholarly misconduct, editorial practice. They provide discussions about fake journals, predatory publishing. And I really want to recommend everybody go onto their website and have a look. And it's quite revealing and enlightening to read that. And that gives an idea and the indication on an international level, the position that we should hold and where we should really stand. From the above, the following, this is just the items that stand out to me, that we have to comply with international best editorial and publication practices. We have to scrutinize the avenues and avoid becoming victims of predatory publishing. You know, if we spend the same effort in scrutinizing the journal before we publish, and we use the same effort what we collect the data and conducting our research, I think that's the route that we should go. We just cannot accept that our head of department, our dean, or even our supervisor or an eminent scholar published in this particular journal, and that's okay. We've got to do that scrutiny ourselves. Now, Cinta Galen Torres, in the journal called Halion in 2022, she published a table, how to spot a journal that exhibits non-standard behavior. And she did a systematic analysis, and she provides wonderful guidelines that we can use to evaluate and check a journal. And this particular slide, you can take that particular table and move it up and down and have a look at this. And also I've got the link there, and you can download her paper and have a look at that. That's a wonderful paper that a person can use as guidance to identify a non-standard behavior journal. Items that stand out, they've got a wide scope, include as many papers as possible. The typical multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary journal. And if you look at the scope of some of these journals, you can see what you can publish. It looks like some of you can really publish about anything. Fast track publication. Have a look at the submission date and the publication or acceptance date. A week or a few weeks is always a danger sign. There's either poor, fake, or no peer review, and there's opaque editor and editorial boards. Some of those members listed in these journals are copied from other journals. They do not exist. I have shown a little bit later on, there were South African people listed on the editorial board, and when I called them, they said they don't even know about this particular journal. They've got a high publication rate, so if you find a journal and suddenly you see, but well, they've got 12 publications per year, and for every edition, they've got a high volume of papers in this particular journal. And you look at the titles of these papers and they're outside the scope. If it's an education journal and suddenly there's management and engineering and medical papers in this journal, that's a sign. And they use manipulative language, praising an author. Typical would be when you receive an email back after you submitted a paper, sometimes within 2 weeks or very short time, and it would say, "Congratulations, we have accepted your paper," with exclamation marks or smiley faces, and modifying words to make you feel good, also a sign. And they've got misleading information on the website, mostly that they have got a certain listing on Scopus or Web of Science. You can actually look the Web of Science on a monthly basis. They would delist a journal. It's on the website. You can see which journals they delist. Scopus as well. Scopus throughout the year also would delist journals. You can also find this on the website. And some of these predatory journals, when they delisted, they would keep the claim of being listed on the Web of Science, DOAJ, or Scopus for quite a couple of years. And then acting as an intermediary. There are organizations that seem to act as a go-between authors and journals. These are the ones to avoid. And one example is this particular group, ARDA Conferences. These businesses act as an intermediary. I've had some communication with them, and I would strongly warn, stay away from this organization and any journals which they list on their website, because for them, they seem to promise a few days or a few weeks between submission and publication. And if you go to those particular journals, you can see all the warning signs that some of, if not all these journals, operate as predatory journals. And many of them are on the DHEAD list and are still on indices, but some were delisted by Scopus and the Web of Science. But on the journal website, they still claim that they've got this accreditation. And one in particular, which is currently being promoted in South Africa, is the African Journal of Biological Sciences. For example, that particular journal lists Tim Forsman, University of Mpumalanga, as a member of the editorial board. And I called him, he says, no, he's not even aware that he's listed as editorial board member. And I noted another South African scholar listed as an editorial board member. And there's Tim Forsman listed as an editorial board member. And this was, I think, a few days ago that I called this up. And in fact, I think Tim was going to contact the journal and tell them to remove his name. But obviously that hasn't happened. Right, the African Journal of Biological Science. Now, what makes this so confusing, I think, for young scholars, the journal is on the DHEAD's 2024-25 list. It's in the DOAJ and the Scopus tab. So if you would go on the DHEAD's list and you want to publish in this journal because it's suddenly promoted, you receive an email, you'll say, but it's on the DHEAD list, it must be okay. And if you download the Scopus content list, you can see it is covered until 2024. Now I've got a link there. So a person would think this is fine. However, if you have a look there, Scopus only covered it until 2022, and they only curated 44 documents in 2022. So Scopus content list is not accurate in terms of this particular journal, and neither is the D-head list up to date, because the D-head list should have discontinued this on the 2023 items. But of course, the D-head receives these lists from Scopus and DOAJ. So the problem lies with the list that Scopus develops and compiles, sends this out, or that you can download from their website. And I think that's where the problem goes. So the best is really to see which were the last journals that they've curated. And sometimes it could state the years currently covered by Scopus, say from 2019 to 2024, but then have a look if it is still curated up to date, or has Scopus delisted this journal in 2024, right? And this is the African Journal of Biological Science, and these are some of the papers authored by South African scholars. And if you have a look at that, there's an issue about language of Lerner syndrome, POPO. It's got nothing to do with biological sciences. And if you look at other papers in this journal, you can also see many of them has got nothing to do with biological sciences. So what I suspect is that authors become aware of this quick publication journal. Maybe they would know there's something amiss, maybe a predatory journal, but because the universities would financially reward them and they would get promotion, like in India, for example, or some places you've got to publish in Scopus listed journals to get a permanent appointment, and then they would, of course, send their work to this particular journal. Right. Jeffrey Beal, I think most of you must have heard about Jeffrey Beal. He's got a wonderful list. It was discontinued, but it is also updated. Jeffrey Beal is retired at the moment. He was a librarian. And you can go through his list and see the criteria that he listed. For example, I want to highlight a few. Misleading and false information on their websites, like journal editors, people on their board being indexed by Scopus or another Web of Science. They use boastful language to attract papers. They neglect to provide quality peer review. If one sends a paper to a journal and you get an affirmative that your paper has been accepted without peer review, a danger sign. I once wrote a fake paper under a fake name, fake university, sent it to a couple of predatory journals, and one actually supplied a wonderful peer review, but it was machine generated. They ticked all the boxes, but if you read through the peer review, you can see there was no human involvement there. It was like an AI peer review of the content of the paper. So a person must also watch out for this. By the way, that fake paper was never published. It was published, and I asked them to withdraw it, and they said, no, I must pay the publication fees. I said, well, I've scammed you, and then they withdrew the paper. And in fact, all of the journals that I've sent it to, apart from two, wanted me to pay, and within a week they would publish the paper. Okay, they deviate from appropriate scholarly practices. And then just a note on predatory conferences. And I've seen this in South Africa. Conferences organizers, South African conference organizers, they tick all the boxes. They produce edited conference proceedings, all in an attempt to allow South African authors to claim subsidy. The editorial care is poor and their peer review is below par. Now, I've seen so many of these peer review reports, it's just a tick box. On a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, they must just indicate yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then the bottom of the peer review, 1, 2 sentences could be stating, yeah, they recommend in the proceedings, however, the literature review must increase and check your spelling and so on. Nothing really content-wise. And I do know that some universities gain the subsidy system by attending these low-quality conferences and then claim subsidies from the D-head, in particular where scholars receive a direct incentives in the salary in violation of the D-head policy. Right, many of these conferences and predatory journals don't have access to a pool of qualified, high-quality peer reviewers. And the peer review process enables misconduct. For example, when you are allowed to nominate one's own reviewers. So it's very well possible for a person to create a fake email address and a fake person and submit this to such a journal, and you would be able to peer review your own work. I do know of a eminent scholar that lost the NRF rating due to some scholarly misconduct in terms of peer review. Accredited journals have no function, editor or editorial board. So contact maybe a person on the editorial board and ask them if they've been active, what have they been doing, and if they said they haven't heard from the journal in a couple of years, watch out for those journals. And then information is opaque and sometimes false and copied from other journals. They hide the origin. They pretend to be Eurocentric or in America, but are located in India. And some of them have box offices somewhere in London. And if you actually go to the companies that registered that particular address, you'll find that in one little office somewhere in an obscure street or even a upmarket street in London, there are 40 companies registered in that particular office. So no one sits there, but by using that address, they pretend they are located in the UK, but they really operate from India or somewhere in Pakistan or in China or some place in Africa. Some cast a wide net. They want to capture as many papers as possible, more papers, more funding. They publish beyond the scope and poor copy editing, no proper quality control. Have a look at the titles of the authors that they put in front. Some journals most journals do not include prefixes in front of authors like professor or doctor. Some of these lower quality journals would include that, and there's no proper spacing, one thing. And of course, they would publish many papers in a year, contributes to the revenue, and read the papers, actually see the content of the papers. Low quality journals, predatory journals, and journals with questionable publication ethics do not provide information about ethics review, and if any ethics review took place when scholars collected data from people, animals, or from the environment. They promise quick turnaround time. Short time between submissions and acceptance indicates poor editorial practices. Right. And the one that we've got to watch out for are these smart and sophisticated predatory journals. And I think earlier on, if you've seen those smart clone journals, those would be examples. They are faultless. They tick the right boxes. However, they're not able to provide quality peer review because they do not have access to specialists. You know what a person can do, and I've done this once, sat in committees, and people are supposed to approve items, and then I duplicate one sentence in a paragraph. And for years, I realized people never read this. I just approve, say it's okay. Because if they have read it, they would have noticed one sentence was duplicated. So that may be one way to see if there's actual proper quality peer review, because a peer reviewer would pick up you have duplicated a sentence. Okay. Other questionable activities that take place is citation stacking, journal stacking, or even attracting papers for a startup journals. Papers were published before. Have a look at the citations in a particular journal. If there's a lot of self-citation or citation to the previous work of other co-authors, that's another telltale sign. Identifying, this is my summary, poor or no peer review, fast turnaround time, outside the scope, large volume of papers in a volume or in an edition, many special editions with guest editors, and there's no return in value for the article processing charges, poor editorial services. If we pay $500 or $1,000 for a paper, do we get value for the money for the article processing charges? Do we get quality peer review when the paper is published? Was there proper editorial care of the work? Right, a few case studies. Here's another clone journal. This is also a journal that is quite popular with South African authors. And here I believe there's like a hidden network operating in South Africa and other countries as well. Is where, say, an author at my university has got friends at your particular university, and they would hear from someone else that this is a very easy journal would publish, and they would communicate with each other. And suddenly, within, say, a few months, a particular cloned or predatory journal receives and publishes a lot of papers from South African authors. And if you have a look at the surnames of the authors, you can see there's sometimes a linkage between them. They've published before, and so there's a hidden cartel operating. But anyway, this is the Il Ponte, the Bridge Journal. It's an Italian journal. It's indexed by the Web of Science, and it's on the Diet list. It's a fairly reputable journal. They would publish on revolutions and stuff like that. However, if you insert Il Ponte in a web browser, you will land up at two clones, the Ponte Journal and the Ponte Multidisciplinary Journal of Sciences, and so on. The communication person from both of them, and I've communicated with the person, is the same person, uses the same email address. So it's the same organization that cloned this particular journal. And this is what the two clones look like. The one on the left-hand side is a clone. The papers are not open access. The one on the right-hand side, the papers, they are open access. In fact, the one on the right-hand side, at face value, when you look at it, it looks like the legitimate one because it does not have all this paraphernalia and graphics with it to provide it some fake form of legitimacy. But these are the South African authors that have published in it quite recently. And this journal has been cloned for a number of years. And in some of them, some of the issues, it's mostly South African authors that publish in it. And it looks like our universities would gladly pay the publication fees to these fraudsters. And I'm sure that if universities have, and I'm sure they have, uploaded these items to Clarivate and claim subsidy, the DHET would gladly pay subsidy to universities. Technicum Social Sciences Journal, also predatory journal, 100 papers since Jan 2021. And I just used the word South Africa in the title, and I scanned through them, and it looks like 100 plus papers by South African authors, 133 editorial board members. Wow. And they cover a wide range of disciplines. They claim of being indexed in Google Scholar, but Google Scholar, remember, is a search engine. It's not an index. And you can actually have a look where the authors come from. And here is another hijacked journal. Now, Naveo is a paper about volatile oils and essential oils. And about a year ago, I noticed that this journal was hijacked, and I communicated with one of the board members that served on this, and he told me what really happened. He said they had problem. It was a small scientific organization that worked in this field, and they would publish their conference papers as articles in their journal, and they managed their own publication of the journal, their own formatting, and so on. And it was either by invitation or they went to an outside organization to assist them with publishing this particular journal to manage that difficult part of formatting and putting it on the web and so on. And by the way, they never ask any publication fees, article publication charges. So what has happened, the new owner or the new publisher suddenly removed the editor and the editorial board, and they made it an open access journal, promoted it, and they would accept anything that you would send to them as long as you pay the article processing charges. So this is really like a hijacked journal. Like if someone hijacks your car, they become the owner of the journal, but they're not the legitimate owner. And they would publish papers outside the scope. Now, Scopus noted this, and they discontinued in 2021. But this particular journal still would claim that they indexed by Scopus, and they would put the graphics over there. And you'll also notice there they promote the call for papers, the African Journal of Biomedical Research. And I think there's a whole network of criminal activities that are in contact with each other. And they are really pushing the African Journal of Biomedical Research at this moment. And on the DA 2022 tab, it's discontinued by Scopus in 2021. And have a look at the opaque editorial board. A C.C. Yin, an associate professor in Cancer Center, USA. So have a look at the editorial team. Anything questionable, warning sign. And these are two papers, and one University of Limpopo on the left-hand side, and I think there's an author from your institution, University of Johannesburg, on the right-hand side. Now, if you look at the paper on the left-hand side, you look at the title, it's got nothing to do with the scope of the journal. But if you look at the journal on the article on the right-hand side, you can see this is a paper actually within the scope of the original journal. So I believe the authors on the right-hand side were scammed. They were not aware that this particular journal was hijacked, and maybe they could have looked on the D-head list of a year ago. Now, this was published in 2023, so this Navajo appeared on the D-head list of 2022, and they must probably reason the journal is legitimate. So I think they really got scammed by publishing in this hijacked journal. The people on the left-hand side, they must have known this is the easy route to publish. Right, identifying reputable journals and selecting a journal. Now, we know about the D-head list, and the D-head list includes journals from a lot of indices, and I've listed them there. And they also contain South African journals that are not listed on the major indices. But a journal on that particular list is no guarantee that the journal is free from predatory behavior, or that the journal will not be withdrawn from the accredited list or removed from a reputable index. So a journal may be legitimate, say, in 2021. In 2022, it maybe changes ownership, gets a new editor, and now they start accepting papers outside the scope of the journal. They start skimping on peer review and editorial care, and they start increasing the income. And maybe it's a business operated by an individual or a small group of people, and then they realize, but they can make more money by accepting papers outside the scope and increasing the volume. And in 2022, Scopus or Web of Science, the DOAJ would go through this and realize there's something wrong. They would investigate the journal and they would delist the journal, say, in 2023. However, the journal may still appear on the DH list of 2024, but the predatory behavior already started in 2021 and 2022. So this is the danger. A journal may still be on a DH list of credited journals, but it acted as a predatory journal a couple of years before. Publishers retract paper due to editorial misconduct and compromised peer review. And they can still be on reputable indices and appear on our D list that we use of accredited journals. And there's a very good article there. In Derby, for example, retracted more than 8,000 papers from paper mill activity. And these were papers published in reputable journals. A Nature report is an article in Nature that reported a retraction of more than 10,000 papers due to questionable activities. And this is a case study. This sort of broke the news. I think this was right in September, right now. Educational Administration Theory and Practice. Have a look on the right-hand side, and you can see there again, there's a call for papers, the African Journal of Biomedical Research. So that's a media danger sign when I noticed that. And this is now the landing site of the particular journal. Now, Scopus discontinued this journal this year due to radar. Now, radar, if you look at Scopus, there's a sudden increase in the amount and the number of journals that they would publish, something that a person cannot explain. However, this journal still appears on the DA 2024-2025 list. So a scholar wanting to publish in this particular journal would look on the D8 list and says, well, it is on the list, it must be okay. However, Scopus discontinued that journal this year. And this predatory behavior already started taking place 2 years before. The journal publishes papers outside its scope. It misleads authors with information on its website. It publishes many papers. And this particular journal is also linked to ARA conferences, an organization that acts as an intermediary and promises fast publication. I identified 25 papers. They indicate an affiliation with UJ, UNISA, DUT, TUT, University of Pretoria, University of Zululand, and Limpopo. And these papers were published after Scopus discontinued the title. And the South African authored papers are not curated and do not appear in a Scopus index journal. And you have a look at that, you can download a link how Scopus would curate papers. And I only used the term South Africa. I located 40 papers on 18th of October with that particular title. And then the only thing that I did, I only checked those papers where surnames and titles indicate that the work was done in South Africa. So when I say 25 papers, I suspect there are far more than 25 papers by South African authors in this particular journal. So what most probably could happen, universities would most probably upload this for subsidy, collect the subsidy, and then against the D8 policy, financially provide incentives to their staff members. But it's the predatory practice of this particular journal that benefits, not the South African scholars. Right, have a look, and this comes from this particular journal. Editorial team, there's nothing there. And look at the terms that they use: esteemed, highest standard of academic excellence, significant to the quality. These modifying words, these words to make a young scholar, pacify a young scholar that although there's no editor, no editorial team, they're still doing the work, that it's still going to be a good journal. These are two papers published in Educational Administration Theory and Practice, and I think both, there are scholars from Johannesburg in both of these papers. Our universities, some of staff at my university also published in this particular one. I've only included these two because the presentation is at the UJ. And if you notice that the one on the right-hand side, there are a couple of foreign scholars as well from Nigeria as well that are first authors, that are first, second, and third, and fourth authors. Sometimes I wonder who's now paying the publication fees. Is the publication fees split between the authors, or does South African University pick up the tab for paying publication fees? Another clone, also a pretty good clone, also popular with South African authors because it's a quick way of publishing. Journal of Southwest Jiatong University. The clone here is on the right-hand side. Danger and a warning sign, all those graphics at the bottom to give it a sense of legitimacy. The genuine journal is on the left-hand side, and they publish in Mandarin as far as I know, and the papers are in Chinese script. On the left-hand side is a paper in the legitimate journal, and on the right-hand side is South African, a paper in the clone, and of course that is in English. I just want to check, on the right-hand side it is in English, And of course, they would provide some, I think, Chinese script there to give it the link to the Chinese journal. And I think the website of this particular one has also got a abbreviation of CN into it. The clone you can find there, and I noted 12 papers, and here again I just used the term South Africa to search for the legitimate journal you can find there. Another paper, and this is a hijacked journal. This particular journal was published by a university in Hong Kong, and they ceased publication. However, the journal appears on the DHET's list, the Scopus tab, but it was curated by Scopus only until 2022. And Anna Abalkina wrote a wonderful expose about this particular journal. You can check it there on the Retraction Watch website. And this is what two examples of papers by UJ scholars in this particular clone, 2024 and 2021. Maybe someone could warn them that this is a hijacked journal. It's not a genuine journal, just to prevent more papers and more page views going to scamsters. Now, what can we learn from these case studies? A journal on a reputable index does not imply that the journal is not predatory or display a predatory pattern. We mustn't accept that the DHET list is accurate or up to date. Scopus may remove a journal, but the same journal could still be on the DHET list for that particular year and the next year. Avoid easy and obscure journals, easy to publish in obscure journals, irrespective whether a journal is on an index or appears on our accredited list. We mustn't accept that the DHET list is free from predatory behavior journals on that particular list, and avoid journals with a short time between submission and publication. Avoid journals with a wide scope, a large volume of papers, or a boastful website language. In particular, when you receive feedback from the editor, if there's boastful language and praising your work. And you can check predatory reports, Retraction Watch, and Skimmongo, and Bell's list for news or discussions about the journal. I found Skimmongo quite helpful. If there's some question about the journal, you'll find many of the authors that would post the questions there, or they would make the comments in that particular area. And browse the web and see if there's web chatter about the journal. Scholars quickly in a blog somewhere would talk about the journal, and they would question the legitimacy or the quality of a journal. Selecting a journal, right? We know that we are supposed to publish our work in the best journal, which is, I think, rule number one. However, these journals are very selective and have a high rejection rate. Some of them have a rejection rate, and I realize that if I'm a master's student, for me to get a paper accepted in a high impact journal, it's nearly impossible. And many of these high quality journals, they would publish papers. And if you look at the authors, you look at the credentials, you can see this as seasoned researchers that work in a group. So as a master's or a PhD student, to compete with them, very difficult. Quality journals require detailed information about ethical approval and so on, funding, authors' contributions, access to raw data, interview audio tapes, analysis, and transcriptions. For example, I can just give one example. One of my students on a master's level did some work and received ethical clearance for the work, supplied the information leaflet to the participants that all agreed to participate. And when I was the submission author, and when we submitted the author to a quality journal, and I suspected it would have been rejected at editor's desk anyway, but we had to give it a try. It was rejected on a technical reason even before it reached the editor's desk. And the reason for that is we did not have on audio tape where every participant made it very clear, audible, that they agreed to be interviewed. Although they received the information leaflet, although it was said to them by the person that interviewed them. This took place during COVID. We didn't have a record or audio tape where they said, I so-and-so agreed to be interviewed with this particular project. That was the journal requirement. So that was the reason why it didn't even go through to the editor's desk. Now you'll notice that low quality journals and predatory journals seldom or never report on ethical approval. They don't provide the names of the research ethics committees that approved the study, or the approval number, or the date, or the person of the research ethics committee that signed off on the approval. So this is also a sign that you can look out for. Do the journals require detailed information about ethical approval? If it's not reported in an article, rather stay away from these articles. Lower ranked journals skimp on these matters, and they don't provide the quality reviews that we require. Now, it's a tall order for a master's student to compete with seasoned researchers and to publish in top-tier journals. So lower-ranked journals do have their place, and they would enable young scholars to kickstart their careers. Now, this may sound in contradiction to my first statement that we should aim to publish in the best journals. However, the reality is, as a young scholar, very few of us would have been able to publish our first papers in a top-tier journal. So there is place for the lower-ranked journals, but still stay away from low-quality journals with predatory behavior. Read Beale's list, look at those publications I've indicated, stay away from that, and select legitimate journals free from predatory behavior, even if they're slightly lower-ranked. Now, selecting a journal. And I found Scopus has got a wonderful place. They've got a wonderful website, and they provide information on more than 46,000 journals. And they list the articles they curate for each year, the journal's rank, and the citation for each article. For example, you can have a look here. This is 164 journals that would publish papers about tourism and leisure and so on. So you can go to Scopus, you can get a particular topic, select a topic, put it in there, and they would provide a list of all these journals. And they would provide them in a ranking order from the best to the lowest. And you can actually go through them and then make your selection in such a way. But even journals over there, you've got to be carefully in your selection and make sure there's no predatory behavior from those particular journals. And they would also provide the citations and how many citations from that particular journal that gives you an indication of their rank and their value. Here's an example of tourism journal, the years it covered, the citation overviews and the journal's rank. In 2024, they curated 25 documents and so on. And you notice there that 2017, it was not covered by Scopus. Web of Science, owned by Clarivate, has got a wonderful manuscript matcher. Person can insert your title, and you can drop your abstract in there. If you've got an abstract, they've got 14,000 index journals, and they can actually make recommendations by which journals may be appropriate for your journal. And then in that way, you can go through each journal and first check and make your selection in that way. Right, and in closing, and I'll keep this very short, I just want to make a comment on predatory publishing as academic misconduct. Now, there's an issue of misconduct. We know that plagiarism, for example, is misconduct. Fabricating results or falsifying results or changing data in a result is seen as misconduct. And then there's also an issue called questionable behavior, like splitting work into two papers. In some cases in medical research, it would be seen as misconduct. Or presenting a paper at a conference and duplicating this paper in a journal and submitting both for subsidy. It's a questionable, because it's an issue of double dipping, obtaining subsidy for the same item. However, There are authors that would see predatory publishing as misconduct, so a serious offense. And I just provide this quote. And it may constitute an active act of avoidance of rigorous peer review of one's work. If such is the intention, it would be in questionable research practice and could be considered an covert form of scientific misconduct. So in short, if we would deliberately select easy to publish journals, predatory journals, and our aim is to avoid rigorous peer review, which is part of our scientific process. If that's our intention, it's a form of scientific misconduct. The consequences of publishing in predatory journals. And here I would compare South Africa with what I've read takes place in other countries. If you go to Retraction Watch and you read some of the papers there, it seems that some leading universities would demote a person or terminate a person's contract if they would publish in predatory journals, or they would retract actually their qualification. I read about one paper, a lady lost a doctoral degree because she participated in some scholarly misconduct. 10th of October, the University World News reported 11 professors at the Indonesian university lost their professorship due to academic fraud. They would call it academic fraud. And their misconduct is they published in predatory journals. And their actions seen as damaging Indonesian higher education standards and eroding trust. Now, I quite like that particular university. And I think if I was a student there, I know that if my professor would publish in a predatory journal, they might lose their professorship. So there is some standard which I've said. I've got the link there. You can read the article. To close, and this is linked to my last one as my last comment about misconduct and predatory journals. And I'm leaving some questions. Do we reward scholars when they publish in predatory journals? The question is, do some? Are these rewards financial incentives? If I would publish in a cloned or predatory journal, and I submit this to my university for submission to the D-head, and I received addition to my salary or in money in my research account, I received a direct or indirect financial incentive in conflict with the D-head policy on subsidy, I get a reward. So the answer is yes. Some, if not most, South African universities reward scholars when we participate in predatory publishing. Do they violate the D-head subsidy policy? The answer is yes. And remember, it's a legal notice. Do we benefit when they publish in predatory journals? Yes, we do. I think many of our South African universities look at the number of publications without looking at the quality and where they are published in. And we do know that people receive promotion and seniority based on the publication records without considering whether these were in public predatory or cloned or hijacked journals. If some scholars benefit from that, will they stop if there are no consequences? For example, if I can increase my salary with a couple of 100,000 per year, and that is not stopped, I'm not going to stop from predatory publishing. So these are just the questions that I would leave with you, and it is really my hope that someone would start taking action, even if it's like a whistleblowing action at universities. We have to do something in South Africa to stop the scourge of publishing in predatory journals and in clone journals, and violating the DHET subsidy policy, and gaming the system in getting financial incentives. And enclosed, there are some useful URLs that you can have a look at. And I'm going to stop sharing now. And let me just close this window. Okay, well, I'm open for comments, critique, and discussion. And if I could provide any answers or reply to your questions, more than welcome. Yes, let me just open my screen a bit more. Rita, yes, please go ahead. You must.
Morning,
Yeah.
morning. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for this presentation. It's something, I've attended other predatory publishing thing, but this was genuinely very in-depth and it gave a good insight on a lot of things. I work in the research office, managing the research publications for submission to DHET. And it is becoming a challenge as well for us. So I have a few things. First of all, before sharing the publication, the slide presentation, a suggestion, especially I am going to look into all those journals that you've mentioned and going to look for all UJ authors in that. But in terms of POPI, as a POPI Act, suggest what you can leave the affiliation, but block out all the author's name. Because, that will contravene the POPI Act. So, and two, I want to know if I could please use your presentation, at my workshops and if possible, circulate to stakeholders.
Yeah, Rita, just expand a little bit more on the POPI Act and removing the authors' names.
Yes, it's like if we, how should I say, we're discrediting this author publicly. So because we had a case like this, so that's why I'm just saying maybe if the authors' names are blocked, that we can have the universe, we will do our searches, and see who's publishing. So that's a suggestion. Or even if you have it in your presentation, I must have the ability to block it off. Because that's one of the issues that we do have. Now, regarding,
thank you so much for highlighting that. I thought a lot about that as well. And in some of my previous presentations, I blocked off the authors and the university names. However, I also realized that these papers are in the public domain, so they're freely available, they are open access. And some of these authors, I think, were duped. So by accident, they published in a cloned paper without knowing it, like in volatile oils, that was one author from UJ. So I'm not sure to what extent we should not name and shame, and to what extent we should keep everything confidential.
Look, if it's out on the general platform, I'm not sure we won't have control. But if I am having it at the university, I must be able to, I'll know who the person is. But when I'm doing presentations, just say to another faculty, I don't want to shame an author from, say, education at Faculty of Science. So I must just have the ability to block out names. But yes, so we can use the journal name as examples,
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you one reason why I opted for this particular one to provide the full paper is that I've seen some PowerPoints by by Stellenbosch University, Johan Mouton and his colleagues, where they also reported on issues, predatory journals and questionable practices, and they actually listed authors and how many papers they produced in their own journals and so on. So the information is there. But thank you. I should really consider that. I have received some opposition and some hidden threats coming my way. But these came from what I believe are professors that willfully and deliberately and continuously publish in these journals for financial reasons to enrich themselves. And of course, they are in no mood to stop this because the income for them is huge, and they do not want the spotlight to fall on these practices. Sorry, yes, and you're more than welcome to take the presentation. You can cut it in pieces. You can use parts of it, even
No,
that text document.
Yeah, no, I
you're
will
well.
reference it to you. In fact,
Yeah.
that one author I have seen, he has that one name. We actually had one some time ago, about 40 articles. And that, or I think Mediterranean Journal, I'm sure you'll remember once.
Yes.
And I can see one author there who published a lot on that journal. And as you say, he's still continuing that practice. But there comes the issue, like you said, the journals, despite being, how should I say, discontinued by Scopus, then I'm just surprised that Jesse Elsevier, when they provide the list to DHET, how come they still give us this journal list? I mean, if it's discontinued in 2021, it's still on 2022, 2023. So I also question Elsevier, but as you say, it's a money-making scheme. The other thing I would like to ask your opinion about MDPI journals.
Yeah. MDPI is I know Johan Maton questions them, and I've read a lot of chatter on the web where people are highly critical and some are very positive. So there's a mixed bag about that. I myself have followed a few authors in South Africa that publish in predatory journals, and I see some of the MDPI journals are their favorites. And I do know that MDPI, what I've read about it, pressurize the editors and reviewers to do a quick publication route. And I think that's the critique that they have, is that they may skimp on quality peer review. So I'm a bit cautious about that. I haven't really investigated any MDPI journals or looked at that, but I'm aware of the questionable activities and how some scholars see the MDPI stable. But that's the same with Andavi as well. So I haven't got much of an opinion apart from that about the MDPI journals. But I have seen some very questionable papers outside the scope of some MDPI journals, and I do know that the editor and the editorial panel for those particular journals don't know what they are doing,
Okay, because we did raise this issue with DHET. Some academics within our institution brought it up. We did write to DHET. They followed up with Scopus. Elsevier, and Elsevier's feedback was they didn't find any that were like of malpractice. Yeah. So, and then you see in our case, if it's as long as it's on DHET list, I think, and the authors are not being penalized, they are publishing in the journal because the argument is it's on DHET list. Then my question would come now, even if we find it as malpractice journal and not proven, will the university retract these outputs? You see, that's another challenge. They would probably say until DHET declares it as predatory, and then we will stop publishing.
Yeah, look, with our university, we sit with a similar issue, is that if I can just sort of generalize and exaggerate a little bit, you have University A, and they would only publish in high quality journals. Okay, University of Cape Town. And I've yet to see names popping up in predatory journals by authors of University of Cape Town. So that university, when they submit this stuff, is fine. Then you've got University B. They are a lower tiered university. They don't have a high group of competent scholars. and they would select a lot of open access journal and IBSS journal, easier to publish than Web of Science journals and Scopus journals. And some of those journals are low quality and they show predatory characteristics with low quality peer outside the scope, but they're still on the DED list and so on. And the university would take the attitude, it's published on the list, we want the money, they would submit everything. But the way that I read the DHED's guidance and also the international thinking is that we should go for quality, not quantity. So universities should really come to a point and say, listen, this is a low quality journal. We're not going to submit this for subsidy purposes. And that will stop scholars from publishing in those particular journals. And in South Africa, unfortunately, we've got the subsidy system. And I think at your particular university and UNISA, staff get a direct financial incentive in their pocket if they would publish. Is that correct?
No, we've got research fund accounts.
Research funds. Okay, they get
Yes.
it in a research account like my university?
Yes. And
Okay, so, you know, if I get, say, 20,000 Rand for each paper I publish in my research account, and I can use that money to go overseas, and I would publish 5 papers in questionable low quality journals with predatory characteristics, and I get 100,000 and I can travel overseas every year for a conference, low quality conference, that's what I will do, because my university is not very strong on stopping that particular practice, and they provide the indirect incentive. I phoned University of Cape Town, one of the research officers, and they confirmed that their scholars do not get any incentive, not even into a research account for papers that they publish. So that's maybe an indication, the route that we should go. I don't
yes,
know.
I am aware of that as well with UCT.
Yeah.
None of them get, yeah. Well, the staff don't get all the fundings. I mean, there's a formula that they use. Even like for national and international journals, I think they are checking on those as well. But also had a very senior, when I was talking about predatory publishing and I brought up the issue of short time, like the turnaround.
Okay.
But I was told by a very senior executive that good journals do have some good journals do have short turnaround time. So
yes, I've noticed that in engineering journals, right?
Mm-hmm.
But look, I still question that. I've looked at some engineering journals where they have photographs through microscope. They've got complex lab work where they do an experiment, say with metals or machinery or substances, and they get certain results and so on. And they have got tables and statistical analysis of the items. And then you look at the submission and acceptance, sometimes it's 2 weeks.
Yes.
And then I wonder myself, but how is it possible for the journal, even an automated system? An editor must receive the paper, must scan it for quality, must select a author, a reviewer must request them to review the paper. They must agree to it. They must receive it, even if it's through automated system. They must do the review and they must return it. And then the authors must respond to the critique or the comments. It must go back to the reviewer. I say to myself, this is just not possible in 2 weeks.
Yes, I also brought up that issue.
And the same, I've also noticed people in some of these journals, the authors that would publish in them, they would maintain this is quality, that's the way it's done, and so on. But for example, there was a massive engineering conference organized somewhere in Africa, and they brought out quite an impressive conference proceedings, and they ticked all the boxes for subsidy purposes. And it really looked impressive, the graphics, the layout, the editors, the conference organizers from different universities, and it was really impressive. However, when I scanned some of the presentations by authors which I question, now this is throughout South Africa, I pick up their names, I noticed that there was some salami slicing going on and duplication of papers. You know, it's slightly different format, different languages and so on, but it's the same content. And I said to myself, but the journal editor or the conference proceedings editor should have picked this up. I'm not an engineer. I can see this. I emailed the conference chair. They don't even reply back. You know, so I say to myself, yeah, the conference takes place in June, July. Proceedings comes out in December, and there are a couple of hundred proceeding papers in there. There's no way they can do proper quality control of that within 6 months. And with the errors that they have, I've got no trust in some of these journals and conference proceedings. Just my personal opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And there's another question I have, but it's totally out of this presentation. But seeing that you're quite, knowledgeable, review articles, because we are really clamping on review articles. And your opinion, how would you think a review article should be?
Are you
Because
talking
I'll
about?
tell you what cases we were having.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll give you an idea. We get a whole lot of literature review or scoping review, and then they just give us like a 10-liner, conclusion. Sometimes in their own words and sometimes even reference from the body of the article. So we are kind of not accepting these kind of articles because we are looking for their original scholarly contribution. But I want from another senior academic their point of view on this.
Look, there's a scoping review, typically what a person would do when you do a doctoral work or a master's work. That's where I understand it. And there's also systematic reviews, where a person really is like a teamwork and they do a systematic review. Now, systematic review, my understanding, is extremely comprehensive, very complex, takes a long time, and normally would need a group of people to do a good systematic review about a particular topic. And I've seen some very good systematic reviews or a meta-analysis in medical journals when, for example, they would look at the effect of a certain treatment, and they would maybe scan all papers that reported experimental studies about this particular treatment, and they would arrive at a certain effect size of this medication, of this treatment for this particular ailment. So some of these meta or systematic reviews are really excellent pieces of work. However, when we come to scoping review or literature review, I have noted that the D-Head rejects book chapters in books which are based on literature review. And some of the comments I've seen, they would say, this is not an original contribution, this is just a literature review. So keeping that in mind, when I see the rejection by the D-Head panels on book chapters, I would say if a paper is published and it's just a literature review in a journal, the university should really hold that back for subsidy purposes. But
yeah,
whether
well,
that
that's
would
what we
happen, I
try to
don't know.
tell them.
Sorry?
That's what we try to tell, but this is only a literature review. What is your new knowledge contribution to this?
Yeah, that it's just a literature review. I mean, yeah, it'll
Yeah,
be good if
because we've got a lot of
universities.
journals like that as well.
Yeah, I know they provide a literature review about that. It may be appropriate for a literature review, but I think if you, this way that I understand, if I read the D-Head policy on subsidy, it's really up to a university to make those quality decisions, what to send in and what to withhold. We're not required to send every paper that appeared in a so-called accredited journal for subsidy. Universities should set the bar for quality, and I think that will raise the bar for a particular university and their reputation as well.
Yes, we are doing that, but we're getting resistance. It's like surprising enough, from very established researchers, it's where is it in the policy that this is what, we are asking for. So, this is what we're trying to say, policies and overview. But through practice, this is the advice we're doing and this is what we are doing, quality control. But
Yeah.
that is where comes the resistance.
Yeah, I know. Rita, just getting back to an item you mentioned before, I think we're talking about the same author.
No, there are other authors as well,
Other
but I know
authors.
that one author in one of the papers.
I've noticed, so most of the papers were published in predatory journals.
Yes, I know one author there.
And it's actually terrible, because think about it. Look, if I can just explain, one of my colleagues at my university spent, I think, 5 or 7 years doing a doctoral degree, recently finished the work. And then I said, how's it going? And the person sent me a link, and it was a paper that was published. And I looked, and this paper got published in a predatory journal. Not even on the Scopus or the Web of Science of the Atlas, just in a plain predatory, low quality journal. I said, what happened here? She said, no, my supervisor, Professor so-and-so, said I must publish in this particular journal. It was published without any peer review within a few days. And it was the person's whole doctoral study, the bulk of the work.
Yeah.
And I say to myself, we don't need professors like that at an institution.
Yes.
And professors that would deliberately and willfully, I use those particular words, and continuously publish in predatory journals, what damage do they do to their students?
Yes, I know we have that problem. And
if they worked at the Indonesian university, that would be the end of the career. If they worked at some high quality universities overseas, that will be the end of the career. But in South Africa, we seem to reward this. Sorry, I've said too much, but you know.
No, thanks for that. Another thing for the tip as well, I'm also conducting interviews now. And the point that you said, the journal where, although the interview is agreed, but when I'm recording it, they identify themselves. But I'm going to go back and say, they have to mention that they have agreed to the interview. Thanks for that tip.
Yeah. Look, it was quite a disappointment. Nkosi Yetu, sorry, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks. I've done now. Thank you.
Nkosi Yetu.
Prof, sorry, there was someone's mic that was unmute, but I've managed to mute that person.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Prof. I'm done with you have this, this presentation has been very helpful.
Thank you, colleagues. If there's any other questions for Prof. Rudy, please can you either pop it in the chat, or alternatively you can just raise your hand and speak. Thank you. Prof, with your permission, we'll give it another minute. If anyone has any questions, please, feel free to speak. If not, then we can start closing up the session. Thank you. Prof, there doesn't seem to be any more questions. So with that, I think we can close the session. Once again, we would like to express our appreciation to the colleagues for participating, as well as Prof. Rudy for all of your hard work, time, and effort. Thank you for supporting the RCD unit. We really appreciate this presentation today. Just a gentle reminder to all attendees If you could please fill in the survey, which has been posted in the chat. It really helps us to improve our service year on year and as well as provide positive feedback to the facilitator. So once again, thank you all for joining. I wish you all a fantastic day, and we hope to see you at one of our future workshops. Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.